The baggage carousel had already made its slow, tired circle 3 times when Bear locked his paws to the polished floor and refused to move. Officer Michael Grant felt the leash go tight in his fist, felt the 80-pound Belgian Malinois plant himself like something rooted deep in the earth, and knew right down in the pit of his stomach that the scuffed Navy suitcase turning past them was not luggage at all. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from right now, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories like this one. Bear had never done this. In 6 years of service, through 432 calls, through drug busts and firearm searches, and one long night of a hostage standoff at a bank in downtown Louisville, the dog had never once frozen. He was a working animal, trained by the state of Kentucky's finest handlers, and he did what he was told. He alerted, he barked, he struck, he held, he released. He did not stand still. Michael crouched slowly beside him and put a hand on the dog's shoulder. The muscle under the fur was hard as stone. Bear's ears were locked forward, straight up, twitching only at the tips. His tail was rigid and his lips were pulled back just enough to show the pink line of his gums. A low sound came from somewhere deep in his chest, not quite a growl, not quite a whine, and it was that sound, more than anything, that made Michael reach for his radio. "Central, this is Grant," he said, and he heard his own voice come out steadier than he felt. K-9 unit reporting an alert at Louisville International, baggage claim, Carousel 4, requesting supervisor and clearance of the immediate area. The voice that came back was tinny and calm. "Copy, Grant. Nature of the alert." He looked down at Bear, who had still not blinked. "Unknown," he said. "I need everyone away from this belt right now." Within 90 seconds, 4 uniformed officers had moved the crowd back to the edge of the terminal. Passengers grumbled. They had been up all night, they said. They had connecting flights. They had children waiting. But the grumbling died the moment they saw the shepherd standing motionless, with his eyes fixed on the belt. Something about the way an animal refuses to move can hush a room faster than any voice can. Even the man on the phone in the leather jacket stopped talking mid-sentence and lowered his cell as if he had forgotten why he was holding it. The suitcase came around again. Navy blue, hard shell, scuffed along one corner as though it had been dragged across concrete. A single torn stub of boarding pass fluttered from the handle in the breeze of the moving belt. No name tag, no colored ribbon, no luggage tracker. Just the kind of bag a traveler could pick up at any big box store for $40-something. Michael studied it, and something crawled up the back of his neck. Sergeant Ramirez arrived at a jog, radio in hand, and stopped short when he saw Bear. How long has he been like that? 4 minutes he alert on drugs? He didn't sit. Ramirez frowned. Bear's narcotics alert was a sit. His firearms alert was a down. He had no verbal alert, no bark, no nudge. Everything was posture. Everything was silent. That was how they had trained him. Freezing was not an alert. Freezing was something else entirely. Bomb? He never trained on explosives. Then what? Michael did not have an answer. He watched his partner and saw, for the first time in 6 years, something that looked almost like fear in the dog's brown eyes. Not fear for himself. Fear for whatever was inside that bag. "Clear the terminal," Michael said quietly. "All of it. Get me the bomb squad and a paramedic on standby." Ramirez did not argue. He turned and started barking orders into his radio, and within another 5 minutes, the whole baggage claim was empty, except for the 2 of them, the dog, and the little Navy suitcase, making its patient, endless loop past their feet. The bomb squad rolled in with their robot and their armored suits. Michael watched them work from behind a fiberglass barrier at the far end of the hall. They stopped the belt. They approached the bag. They ran a wand over it, then another. They listened. They tapped. They finally carefully cut a small hole in the fabric near the corner and pushed a fiber optic scope inside. The man operating the scope froze. His shoulders locked. He lifted a hand to his commander and beckoned him over. and when the commander bent down to look at the screen, his face went a color Michael had never seen on another human being. Not white, not grey, but the color of paper left too long in the sun. "Get me a medic," the commander said. "Right now." Michael's throat closed. He tried to move forward, and Bear moved with him, matching his stride. And by the time they reached the bag, the commander was already working the zipper open with hands that were not steady. The smell hit Michael first. It was not what he expected. Not chemicals, not powder, not accelerant. It was warm milk. It was sweat. It was the sour, familiar smell of a small child who has been sleeping too long in a closed space. And underneath it, faint and awful, the smell of urine that had dried and then wet again. Inside the suitcase, curled beneath a folded grey winter coat, lay a small girl no older than 4. Michael did not remember getting to his knees. He did not remember reaching in. He remembered only how light she was in his arms, how her small hand hung limp against his sleeve, how her lashes fluttered against her cheeks as if she were trying to wake from a dream she could not quite escape. Her lips were dry and cracked, her hair, brown and matted, stuck to her forehead in a sweaty ribbon. She was breathing. She was breathing. "She's alive," Michael said, and his voice came out cracked. "She's alive." The paramedic swept in with a stretcher and an oxygen mask and a bag of saline already spiked. Michael laid the child down as gently as if she were spun from glass. Bear moved with him. The big, blocky head pressed against her small ribs and stayed there, and Bear closed his eyes, and for the first time in that entire terrible hour, he let out a long, shuddering breath, as if he had been holding it since the bag first passed by. The child stirred. Her hand moved and found the fur at Bear's neck. She turned her face into it, and when she spoke it was so soft that Michael had to bend down to hear. "Mama," she whispered. Then her small, trembling finger came up and pointed toward the far end of the concourse, toward the wide glass doors where a river of travelers still moved, unaware, toward departures. Michael was already turning before the paramedic could stop him. So was every officer in the terminal. Ramirez pulled the security footage before the child had even reached the ambulance. In the little control room, behind the ticketing counter, 3 monitors flickered to life and rolled back the last 2 hours in fast, jerky motion. Michael stood over the shoulder of the tech and watched the belt spin backward until at 47 minutes past 3 in the morning, a woman came into frame from the left. She wore a wide sun hat. That was the first thing everyone noticed, a pale straw hat with a floppy brim. Entirely wrong for a terminal at that hour, entirely wrong for the weather outside. Underneath it, a long tan coat, a large leather handbag, and dark glasses she did not remove even inside. She pulled the navy suitcase behind her with one hand. In the other, she carried a paper coffee cup she never drank from. She walked to Carousel 4. She lifted the suitcase with more effort than the size of it should have required. She set it on the belt. She did not linger. She did not look back. She turned and walked away in the direction of departures at a pace that was neither hurried nor casual, the pace of a woman who had rehearsed the walk in her head 1,000 times. "Where's she going?" Michael said, and it was not a question. The tech scrolled the cameras forward. The woman moved through security in a different terminal. She had a boarding pass in a plastic sleeve and settled at gate C12. The camera angle showed her sitting near the window. She removed the sun hat and set it in her lap. Even at that distance and grain, Michael could see her hands. They were folded tight in front of her, the knuckles white. "Departures at C12, where?" "Seattle," said the tech, non-stop. "Departs in 23 minutes. Michael was already running. Bear was at his heel, his paws clicking rapid against the tile, and behind them, Ramirez was on the radio calling for a full uniformed response to Gate C12. Do not approach, do not spook, contain, and hold. The terminal blurred past. Michael did not know he could still run like that. He was 46 years old. His knees were shot from a decade on patrol, and yet he moved as if he were 20 again. And the reason was that a small girl had put her hand in his dog's fur and whispered a word that meant either safety or terror or both. They saw her from 100 yards out, row 3 of the boarding area near the window, sun hat back on her head. She had not moved. Then she looked up. Something in a person's posture changes the exact instant they know they have been seen. The woman rose from the plastic chair and turned toward the exit at the far end of the concourse, and the ordinary sound of a terminal, the boarding calls, the rolling suitcases, the small children asking small questions did not stop. But Michael was aware only of the pounding of his own blood and the rapid, deliberate patter of Bear's paws beside him. She ran. She made it 30 yards. Her heels, cream-colored and impractical on the polished floor, betrayed her at the seam where the carpet ended and the tile began. Her ankle turned. She went down hard, one hand out, the leather handbag skidding away toward the moving walkway, her sun hat rolling off across the floor like a wheel. By the time she pushed up to her elbows, Michael was standing over her, and Bear was standing a step back, silent and watchful, not growling, not moving, just watching her with an expression that even Michael, who had known that dog for 6 years, could not read. She did not fight. She lay there for a long moment, and then she said very quietly, "Is she alive?" Michael stared down at her. "She's alive," he said. The woman put her forehead against the tile and closed her eyes. Whatever it was, whatever the word for the sound she made, it was not the sound of a criminal caught. It was the sound of a person who had done something she could not undo, whose hardest hour was only now beginning. They took her to the substation off Terminal B, one of those small rooms with a metal table and 2 chairs bolted to the floor and a mirror on one wall that pretended to be a mirror and fooled no one. Michael did not go in. He stood in the observation room behind the glass and watched Ramirez sit across from her and slide a bottle of water across the table. Her name was Rebecca Holloway. She was 38 years old. She lived in a small apartment above a dry cleaner on Vine Street in Phoenix. She had no criminal record. She had never been arrested. She had one prior civil action against her, a custody dispute that had ended 11 months earlier in a Kentucky family court. She had lost. "Ms. Holloway," said Ramirez gently, "I'd like you to tell me what happened tonight." She was calm. That was the first thing Michael noticed, and the thing that troubled him most. He had expected screaming. He had expected denial. He had expected a lawyer demanded at the door. He got a woman who folded her hands on the table and told the story of the last 24 hours, as if she were reading it from a page. She had taken a red eye out of Sky Harbor at 11:52 the night before. She had checked one bag at the counter, a scuffed navy suitcase she had bought that morning at a discount store on Camelback Road. She had carried on a soft duffel with a change of clothes and a stuffed rabbit with one ear chewed off. She had told the check-in agent that her bag contained clothes and books. She had ordered a coffee she did not drink. She had boarded the plane. She had landed. She had walked past the child's suitcase on the carousel because she needed a witness to see her leaving without it. She had bought a second ticket at the counter in a false name using cash. She had planned to be in Seattle before anyone opened the bag. "Why?" said Ramirez. Rebecca looked up. Her eyes were red, but she was not crying. "Because the court stole her from me," she said, "and I could not let her stay stolen." Michael turned away from the glass. He walked out into the corridor and leaned his forehead against the wall and stayed there for a long time. Bear sat down next to him. When he finally opened his eyes and looked at the dog, Bear was watching him with the same expression he had worn beside the child on the stretcher, patient, alert, waiting to know what to do. "Come on, partner," Michael said, and they walked out to the car. The hospital was 10 minutes across town, and by the time they got there, the sun was coming up over the Ohio River, pale and pink and unearned, the kind of sunrise that has no idea what has happened in the night. Michael parked in the emergency lot and let Bear out. Nobody stopped them. Everyone in the emergency ward already knew who they were and what dog that was. The child was on the 3rd floor, pediatric ward, room 308. A nurse pointed them down the hall. Michael reached the door and heard from inside the low sound of a man crying, and he stopped and let the man have his moment before knocking. Daniel Foster was on his knees beside the bed. He was a small, wiry man in navy work coveralls, the name of an auto shop stitched over the pocket in red thread. His hands were black around the fingernails from a lifetime of engines. His hair was thin on top and grey at the temples. He looked, Michael thought, like a man who had never expected anything much from life and had learned to be quiet about it. He was holding his daughter's small hand in both of his and pressing it to his forehead, and his shoulders were shaking, and he was saying over and over, "You're here, baby, you're here, you're here, you're here." The child was awake. Her cheeks were pink now, her lips no longer cracked, and she was holding a stuffed brown rabbit against her chest with her free hand. A nurse had brought it up from the pediatric supply closet, an old thing missing one glass eye, and the child had gripped it as though it were her whole world. Michael stepped back from the door. He would give them time. He turned and saw Bear. The dog had walked past him and stretched himself out along the threshold of the door, chin resting on his front paws, eyes fixed on the child. He did not move when Michael called his name softly. He did not move when a nurse tried to step over him with a cart. He did not move when someone offered him a bowl of water. He lay there like a stone lion at the gate of a temple, and Michael understood then that no one was going to move that dog until the animal was satisfied that the child in the bed was safe. Michael pulled a chair down the hall and sat in it. He would wait too. He did not sleep that day. He sat in the hall until the shift changed, and then he walked Bear back to the car and drove home. And there he lay on his couch with his uniform still on and stared at the ceiling and could not close his eyes. He kept seeing the woman in the sun hat with her forehead pressed to the tile. He kept hearing the calm, flat register of her voice. "The courts stole her from me." He kept seeing the little girl's finger point down the concourse. At 3 in the afternoon, he gave up on sleep and drove back to the precinct. He asked for the file on Rebecca Holloway, and he sat at his desk with the fluorescent light humming overhead, and he read, "Rebecca Holloway, 38, born in Owensboro, Kentucky, younger sister of one Sarah Holloway Foster, deceased. Deceased." Michael sat up straighter. He kept reading. "Sarah Holloway Foster died in a fall down the interior staircase of a rental house on Willowbrook Lane, Louisville, on the 11th of December of the previous year. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head and neck, ruled accidental by the coroner. She had been 32 years old. She had left behind one child, a girl named Hannah Grace Foster, aged 3 at the time. She had also, at the time of her death, been legally separated but not yet divorced from her husband Daniel Foster of Louisville. Custody of Hannah had reverted to Daniel by default. Rebecca Holloway had contested that custody in family court, filing a petition alleging that the child was in an unsafe environment. The judge had ruled that Rebecca's allegations were unsubstantiated. The petition had been dismissed. Rebecca had appealed. The appeal had failed. Michael turned the page. There was a photograph of Rebecca and Sarah, sisters, arms around each other, at what looked like a birthday party. Sarah was taller. Rebecca was laughing so hard her eyes were closed. Between them, in a pink dress, was a very small Hannah, 1-year-old maybe, staring at the camera with the wide, startled eyes of a child seeing a lens for the first time. Michael sat back in his chair. Rebecca Holloway was not a kidnapper who had taken a stranger's child. Rebecca Holloway was the girl's aunt. She was her mother's sister, and she had come from Phoenix, where she had apparently moved after losing the custody battle, all the way back to Louisville to try to take her sister's daughter across the country and disappear. The question was why. He put the file down and rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. Bear was lying beside the desk with his chin on Michael's boot. He had not left Michael's side since they had come home from the hospital. He had barely eaten either. Michael got up. "Come on," he said to the dog. "Let's go ask her." They had transferred her to the county holding facility on 4th Street by then, one of those low brick buildings that looks like an old post office from the outside and a warren of grey corridors on the inside. Michael signed in and waited in a small room with a table and a plastic chair that hurt his back. When they brought Rebecca in, she was in a blue jumpsuit that hung off her shoulders, and her hair was pulled back with a rubber band. She looked, for the first time, exactly her age, 38 and tired. She sat across from him without speaking. "You're her aunt," Michael said. Rebecca closed her eyes. "Yes, you knew Bear would find her." She opened her eyes again. She looked confused. "I didn't know there would be a dog," she said. "I didn't know any of this. I just needed to get her out." "Out of what?" She stared at her hands. "I don't know," she said finally. "That's the part that's going to sound crazy. I don't know what she was in. I just know my sister called me 3 days before she died, and she said, 'Rebecca, if something happens to me, you have to take Hannah. Take her far. Take her before Trevor does.'" Michael sat very still. Trevor? The man she was seeing? Trevor Reynolds. He'd moved in 6 weeks after Sarah and Daniel separated. He was. She made a small, hopeless gesture with her hand. He was the kind of man Sarah always fell for. Charming, controlling. She saw it too, eventually. She was going to leave him. She was scared. She kept saying, "If he thinks I'm taking Hannah away, he'll do something." And then, 3 days later, she was dead. The coroner ruled it accidental. The coroner ruled. She fell down her own stairs at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday, with nobody in the house but her boyfriend upstairs asleep. She was found by the mailman through the window hours later. Trevor said he never heard her fall. Michael waited. "She was terrified of those stairs," Rebecca said. Her voice was flat now, but her hands were shaking. They were steep and old. She always said she was going to break her neck on them. Everybody heard her say it. And when she died, everybody said, "Well, she said it, she said it, she said it, so it must have happened." And Trevor took his things and moved out 3 weeks later, and nobody looked at him twice. You tried to tell the court. I tried to tell everyone. Michael's mouth was dry. He asked the next question anyway. "Why did you take Hannah?" Rebecca lifted her eyes, and this time she was crying. "Because Daniel let Trevor back into the house," she said. 6 weeks ago. I saw it on Hannah's Facebook page. My niece is 3, but Daniel posts things there, birthdays, Christmas, and there was a photograph of a barbecue. And Trevor was in the background, holding a beer, and Hannah was on the porch step behind him. And I called Daniel and I begged him, "Please, please, this man is dangerous." And Daniel said, "Rebecca, he was Sarah's friend. He brought her some things she left at his apartment, that's all." And I hung up the phone and I bought a plane ticket. Michael did not answer for a long time. Finally, he said, "Did you know about Bear?" She looked at him. "There's a police dog at the airport," he said. "A Belgian Malinois, 6 years old. His name is Bear. He was trained a year ago on the scent kits of 2 children who had briefly gone missing in Louisville. One of those kits belonged to your niece, Miss Holloway." Rebecca's face went very still. "Do you know anything about that?" Michael asked. She did not answer. She only looked down at her hands, and after a long moment, she nodded. One small nod. "I took her once before," she whispered. "Right after Sarah died. I took her for 6 hours. I drove her to a park in Frankfurt, and I sat with her on a bench, and I could not go through with it. I brought her back." Daniel. Daniel called the police. They came. They found me. He said, "Rebecca, I know you love her, I know you're hurting, but if you ever do this again, I will press charges." And I said I would not do it again, and I meant it. I meant it, until I saw the photograph. Michael closed the file in his lap. "Miss Holloway," he said, "I need to make some phone calls." The next morning, Michael pulled Bear's full training file from records. It was 3 inches thick, in a manila folder labeled with the dog's identification number and the year Bear had been assigned to him. He carried it to his desk and started at the beginning. He knew most of it. He had lived most of it. But halfway through the 3rd year, he came to a section he had only skimmed at the time, the annual scent training update, in which the department's K9 handlers received scent kits from open cold cases, missing person files, and unsolved abductions. Bear had received 4 kits that year. 2 were from ongoing narcotics investigations. 2 were from a joint case with the Frankfurt Police Department involving the brief disappearance of 2 small children from a shopping mall parking lot in the summer. Michael sat up. He read the file more carefully. The 2 children had disappeared on the 3rd of July of the previous year, at 2:10 in the afternoon, from the parking lot of a mall in the eastern suburbs. Both children had been recovered within 12 hours. One was a boy, aged 5, taken by his non-custodial mother in an unrelated custody dispute. The other was a girl, aged 2 years and 10 months, taken by an aunt. The girl's name was Hannah Grace Foster. The aunt's name was Rebecca Holloway. Michael sat back in his chair. He put his hand over his mouth and stared at the file. He read the record 3 more times. He looked at the photograph clipped to the front, a wide-eyed toddler with her mother's dark hair and a smile too big for her small face. Bear had been trained on Hannah's scent a year before he ever saw her at Carousel 4. The scent kit, according to the log, had been assembled from a onesie Hannah had worn the day she disappeared. Sarah Foster had brought it to the police herself. Bear had memorized it in a controlled session at the training facility on Old LaGrange Road. He had never been called to use it in the field because Hannah had been returned before he was needed. The kit had sat in the department archive ever since. Michael closed the file. He put his hand on Bear's head. The dog was asleep beside the desk with his chin on Michael's boot. "You remembered her," Michael said softly. "A year later. In a suitcase on a belt. You remembered her." The dog did not stir, but his tail moved once softly against the carpet. Michael started with the coroner's office. He drove there himself, Bear on the passenger seat with his head hanging out the window, and he sat down across from a woman named Dr. Patel, who had ruled on Sarah Foster's death, and who remembered the case immediately. "Straight fall," she said. "Fractured skull, broken 3rd and 4th cervical vertebrae, minimal defensive injuries." She landed at the bottom of a flight of 13 steps with her legs twisted underneath her. Death would have been within minutes. Any signs of a struggle? A small bruise on her right forearm, consistent with catching herself on the railing. No fingerprints on her that were not her own. How much time between death and discovery? Dr. Patel checked her notes. Approximately 3 hours, and her boyfriend was in the house. According to the report, he was sleeping in the upstairs bedroom. Woke up when the police arrived, claimed he heard nothing. Did anyone investigate him? Dr. Patel looked up. The detective on the case was a man named Halloran. He retired last spring. The investigation was considered closed at the scene. Was there any reason to consider it closed at the scene? She did not answer for a moment. Then she said, "No, Officer Grant." There was not. Michael drove home that night and could not sleep again. He lay on his couch with Bear at his feet and stared at the ceiling and thought about a woman falling down her own stairs while the man who owned her supposedly slept upstairs, and about a coroner who had ruled it an accident because the detective had told her to. He thought about a sister in Phoenix, trying to get anyone to listen. He thought about a small girl in a suitcase. In the morning, he called an old friend named Detective Whitworth in the Missing Persons Unit and asked her to run a check on Trevor Reynolds. She called him back at 11. Trevor Michael Reynolds, 41, currently a resident of Louisville, employed as a bartender at a restaurant on Bardstown Road. 3 prior arrests, One for simple assault, dismissed. One for driving under the influence, plea deal. One for stalking a former girlfriend, dismissed when the woman moved out of state and refused to testify. 2 restraining orders, both expired. No convictions. Clean sheet, on paper. Any current involvements? He was seeing a woman named Sarah Foster. She's deceased, I know. Michael, why are you looking at this man? He told her. She was quiet for a long time. Meet me at the courthouse tomorrow morning, she said. I want to see this Rebecca myself. The next 2 weeks moved in a way that Michael would later describe as the way water moves under ice, silently, steadily, invisible until it broke through. He and Whitworth worked the case in the margins of their assigned duties. They pulled Sarah Foster's phone records from the 2 months before her death. They subpoenaed her bank statements. They interviewed her friends. They interviewed the neighbors on Willowbrook Lane, most of whom had already moved or forgotten, but 2 of whom remembered clearly what had happened the morning Sarah died. Old Mr. Kaminsky, who lived across the street and had insomnia, said he had been sitting on his front porch at 8:40 in the morning, and he had heard raised voices from inside Sarah's house. A man's voice. A woman's voice. He could not make out words, but he could make out fury. He had told the officer who came that afternoon, but the officer, he said, had not written it down. Mrs. Freeman, who lived next door, had been coming back from a walk with her dog, and she had seen a man leave Sarah's house at 9:05 in the morning, not through the front door, through the side gate that opened into the alley. She thought it was odd at the time. She had never spoken about it because no one had asked. Michael listened. Whitworth wrote it down. Sarah's phone records told the rest. In the 6 weeks before her death, she had sent 42 text messages to Rebecca in Phoenix. Michael read them all. He read the one from the 22nd of November that said, "He punched a hole in the wall last night. I told him he had to leave. I told him tomorrow." He read the one from the 5th of December that said, "Rebecca, if anything happens to me, you take her. You take Hannah. Promise me." He read the one from the 9th, 2 days before Sarah died. "I told him he has to be out by the 15th. He said he would burn the house down first." Michael printed the transcripts. He gave a copy to Whitworth. He walked into the deputy chief's office at 9 on a Tuesday morning, and he laid the whole thing on the desk. The deputy chief read it. He read it twice. He sat back in his chair and looked at Michael and said, "You're telling me a woman was murdered a year ago and nobody noticed. I'm telling you a woman was killed a year ago and one person noticed, her sister, and her sister ended up in a suitcase smuggling case at the airport. And her niece is in a hospital bed." The deputy chief picked up the phone. "They arrested Trevor Reynolds at his restaurant on a Wednesday night at 9:52 in front of a full dining room. He tried to run through the kitchen and was tackled by a line cook who used to wrestle in high school. He was booked at 10:38. By midnight he had a lawyer. By 4 in the morning he had said nothing except his name and address. He said nothing, that is, for 9 days. Then Whitworth walked into the interview room and put a photograph on the table. It was a photograph of a hole in a wall, taken by Sarah Foster on the night of the 21st of November. And it was a photograph she had sent to a friend in Ohio the next morning. In the corner of the photograph, in the reflection of a hallway mirror, you could see the sleeve of a plaid shirt and the shape of a man's hand. The hand was Trevor's. The plaid shirt was hanging in his closet. He talked for the next 3 hours. He said he had not meant it. He said they had argued about her leaving. He said she had turned to walk away from him at the top of the stairs, and he had reached for her arm, and she had pulled away, and she had lost her footing on her own, he said. He had watched her fall. He had gone downstairs to check her. She was already gone. He had gone back upstairs and lain down on the bed and waited for someone else to find her. He said this without crying. His lawyer was in the room with him. When he finished, he asked for a glass of water. Whitworth got him one. She had not looked at him once during the confession. Michael was in the observation room. Bear was at his feet. When they walked out of the building that night, the sky was clear and the moon was almost full, and Michael stood in the parking lot and looked up at it for a long time. He thought about Sarah Foster at the bottom of her stairs. He thought about Rebecca Holloway sitting in a jail cell in the county building 3 blocks away, still awaiting arraignment on charges of kidnapping and interstate transport of a minor. He thought about Hannah, at home now with Daniel, being seen by a therapist twice a week and refusing to sleep without the light on. He thought about the man he had just heard confess. Bear leaned against his leg. "Come on, partner," Michael said. "Let's go home." Daniel Foster came to the precinct the day after Trevor Reynolds was charged. He asked to speak with Officer Grant. Michael took him into a small conference room and closed the door. Daniel sat down heavily. He looked as though he had not slept in a week. "I owe you thanks," he said, "for what you did at the airport." "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Foster. I owe you thanks anyway." Michael waited. "There's something I need to tell you," Daniel said. He looked down at his hands. "About Rebecca." "All right. I didn't want her to lose custody. I want you to know that. When the judge dismissed her petition, I felt sick. She loved Sarah. She loves Hannah. She was not wrong to worry about that man. I was wrong not to listen." Michael did not say anything. "She was angry with me," Daniel went on. "The last time we spoke, 6 weeks ago, when she called about the photograph, I told her she was being paranoid. I told her Trevor was over, that he'd just come by for an old jacket. I said things I should not have said, and then she took my daughter. She took her thinking she was saving her." "I know," Daniel's voice broke. "I know that, and I don't know what to do with it, because she's the reason my little girl was in a suitcase. And she's also the reason I know now what really happened to Sarah. She's both, at once. And I don't know how to hold that." Michael studied him. He was a good man, this Daniel Foster. Michael had seen enough men in his life to know one when he sat across from one. He had been a bad husband, maybe in small ways, in the small, careless ways that many men are. Inattentive, dismissive, quick to write off a woman's fear as hysteria. But he was not a cruel man. He had loved Sarah. He loved Hannah. He was not the villain here. And the woman who had tried to save his daughter from a threat she had misread as still living in his house was not either. "There is going to be a hearing," Michael said, "in 3 weeks. The district attorney will make an offer. If you want to speak to Rebecca's charges, you can speak to them. It will make a difference." Daniel nodded, slowly. "I want to speak to them," he said. He got up to leave. At the door, he turned back. "Officer Grant," he said. "Your dog." Michael looked up. He never left her side at the hospital. "No, sir. Not for a whole night. No. How does an animal know?" Michael thought about that for a long time before he answered. "I don't know," he said. "I'm not sure any of us know. I think he knew what he needed to know, and I think he wasn't willing to leave until he was sure." Daniel nodded again. His eyes were wet. "Thank him for me," he said. "Would you?" "I will." Rebecca Holloway sat in a small cell for 33 days. She was allowed 1 hour of exercise, 1 hour of communal recreation, and 30 minutes of phone use per day. She used none of it. She lay on her narrow bunk and stared at the ceiling and did not speak to the other women in the block. She ate what they put in front of her without tasting it. She lost 11 pounds in the first 2 weeks. Michael went to see her on the 18th day. She had not asked for him. He had asked to see her. She came into the small visiting room in the same blue jumpsuit, thinner now, her cheeks hollow and her eyes ringed dark. She sat across from him and did not speak. "Trevor Reynolds confessed," Michael said. 9 days ago. He is being held without bail on charges of manslaughter." Rebecca stared at him, her lips parted slightly. She did not seem to be breathing. "Sarah didn't fall," Michael said quietly. "You were right, Rebecca." She put her hands over her face. She did not cry immediately. It came on her slowly, in stages, first a shudder in her shoulders, then a sound low in her throat, then a long and terrible wail that she pressed into her palms as hard as she could to muffle. Michael sat very still. He did not reach across the table. He was not sure what she would want, and he did not have the right. When she could speak again, she said, "It doesn't bring her back. No. It doesn't make what I did to my niece right. No. But my sister was not lost. She was not clumsy. She did not fall. And now everybody knows. Everybody knows." Rebecca lowered her hands. Her face was streaked and wrecked, but there was a light in her eyes that Michael had not seen before, a small, ferocious light, like the last coal at the bottom of a stove. "What happens to me now?" she said. "The district attorney is preparing an offer. I don't know what it will be. I know Daniel is going to speak on your behalf." "He's going to what?" "He is going to speak on your behalf, Ms. Holloway." She stared at him. "He is a better man than I gave him credit for," she said, and she laughed a small cracked laugh. "God forgive me. He is a better man than I ever gave him credit for." Hannah Foster went home 2 days after they took her out of the suitcase. She weighed 29 pounds. She was pale and dehydrated, and she did not speak for 3 days. She slept on a small mattress on the floor of her father's bedroom because she would not go into her own room. She held the brown rabbit from the hospital everywhere she went. The therapist Daniel took her to was a woman named Dr. Reyes, who worked with traumatized children at a clinic downtown. She had a room full of dolls and puppets and finger paints and a soft rug on the floor. She did not ask Hannah anything the first week. She sat on the rug with her and colored, and eventually Hannah sat down next to her and picked up a green crayon. On the 4th session, Hannah drew a picture. It was a small navy rectangle with a small round face inside it. Around the rectangle she drew, in careful crayon, a large gray shape with 4 legs and pointed ears. She looked at Dr. Reyes and pointed to the gray shape. "Doggy," she said. Dr. Reyes nodded. "That's a big doggy. He came. He came." Hannah nodded solemnly. She colored for another minute. Then she said, without looking up, "Aunt Becca said we were going on a trip." "Did she?" "She said Daddy was coming." Dr. Reyes waited. "Daddy didn't come," Hannah said. "The doggy came." She kept coloring. Dr. Reyes made a note. Later that evening, when Daniel picked her up, Dr. Reyes told him what she had said, and Daniel drove home with his hands tight on the wheel and his jaw locked, and he sat in the driveway for 10 minutes before he could go inside. He called Michael that night. "She thinks I abandoned her at the airport," he said. "That's what Rebecca told her, that we were meeting me, and I never came." Michael did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "She's 4 years old, Daniel. She'll understand more as she gets older. You have time. Do I? You have time, and you have Rebecca. Whatever else is between the two of you now, Rebecca can help her understand when the time comes." There was a long pause on the line. "Do you think Rebecca and I can ever?" Daniel could not finish the sentence. Michael took a slow breath. He looked at Bear, who was asleep on the rug beside the couch, front paws twitching in a dream. "I think that people forgive strange things," he said finally. "I think they find their way back to each other in ways nobody expects. I have seen it before, not often, but I have seen it." Daniel was quiet for a while. "Thank you, Officer Grant." Michael. They hung up. The plea hearing was held on a cold Tuesday morning in a small courtroom on the 4th floor of the county courthouse. The whole thing took 41 minutes. Rebecca Holloway, in a borrowed dress and a cardigan Daniel had brought from the closet of the sister she had lost, stood at the defense table and looked at nothing. The district attorney read the charges: kidnapping in the 1st degree, interstate transport of a minor, endangering the welfare of a child. Under the plea agreement, she would enter a plea of guilty to a reduced charge of unlawful custodial interference and endangering the welfare of a child. She would receive a suspended sentence of 3 years, mandatory psychiatric evaluation and treatment, 5 years of supervised probation, and a permanent restriction against unsupervised contact with her niece until such time as a court modified the order. The judge asked Daniel Foster if he wished to address the court. He stood up. He was in his best clothes, the same navy suit he had worn to Sarah's funeral, and his hands were folded in front of him. He spoke quietly. "Your Honor," he said, "the woman standing there is my daughter's aunt. She is her mother's sister. She loves my daughter and my daughter loves her. She was wrong to do what she did. She was wrong in the way she did it. She terrified my child and she nearly killed her. I know that. She knows that. But she was right about the man in my house, and she was right about my wife, and I want the court to know that in my mind and in the mind of my daughter, Rebecca Holloway is family. And when the day comes that she is allowed to see my daughter again, we will be there. Both of us. Thank you." He sat down. Rebecca did not look at him. She could not. She stared at the wooden floor of the courtroom, and her shoulders were shaking so hard that the cardigan slid off one of them. The judge accepted the plea. He read the sentence. He wished Rebecca well in what he called her long and necessary work of repair. He banged a small wooden gavel, and it was over. Outside the courthouse, on the wide granite steps, Michael waited with Bear. Rebecca came out on the arm of her attorney, blinking in the cold winter light. She saw Michael and stopped. "Officer Grant," she said, "Ms. Holloway, you did this. I did my job. You did more than your job." He did not answer. Bear walked forward. He put his broad head against Rebecca's hip. She looked down at him for a long moment, and then, slowly, she lowered herself to her knees on the cold stone and put her arms around the dog's neck. She whispered something into his fur that Michael did not hear. Bear did not move. The winter turned. Spring came slowly to Louisville that year, the way it always does, a raw, wet March that everyone complains about. Then, one morning in April, dogwoods blooming along the medians of Bardstown Road as though they had been there all along. Michael went back to his regular patrol. Bear went with him. They worked a stolen car ring, and they worked a smuggling operation at the freight yards, and they worked a routine traffic stop that turned into a bench warrant, and none of it felt like it mattered the way that one night at Carousel 4 had mattered. Michael did not talk about it. His wife Linda asked him once over dinner if he was all right, and he said he was, and she looked at him for a long time and then let it drop. His grown daughter called from Cincinnati and said she'd heard about the case on the news, that a friend of hers had sent her a link, and Michael said yes, it was a hard one, and changed the subject. He did not tell anyone, not his wife or his daughter or the other officers at the precinct, about the way Bear had leaned against Rebecca's hip on the courthouse steps. He did tell Whitworth. Once. Over coffee. "That dog knew something we didn't," he said. Whitworth stirred her cup. "That dog knew everything," she said. "That's not the same thing." Michael went home that night and looked at Bear, who was lying under the kitchen table with his chin on Michael's foot as he ate. He reached down and put his hand on the top of the dog's head. Bear looked up at him. "You knew," Michael said quietly. The dog closed his eyes. Meanwhile, Daniel and Hannah found their rhythm. Hannah started at a new preschool that spring, a small church-run program near the auto shop where Daniel worked. She made friends. She talked in full sentences now. She still slept with the brown rabbit, whom she had named for reasons no one understood, Officer Fluffy. Dr. Reyes said she was doing well. She said the terrors that had come the first month, the screaming and the bedwetting, were fading. She said Hannah asked about Aunt Becca every few days. Rebecca began her psychiatric treatment at an outpatient program in Louisville, having chosen not to return to Phoenix. She rented a small studio apartment above a bakery on Frankfort Avenue. She got a job as a bookkeeper at the same auto shop where Daniel worked. Daniel had asked the owner as a personal favor, and the owner, a gruff Vietnam veteran who owed Daniel for a decade of quiet good work, had said only, as long as she does her job. She did her job. She did more than her job. She stayed late on Fridays to catch up on the books. She brought sandwiches for the mechanics. She learned all their names and asked after their families. She and Daniel did not speak often at first, but they nodded at each other when they passed in the parking lot, and one Saturday in May, Daniel invited her to bring some old family photographs to the shop office to show him. She brought a shoebox full. They sat on the concrete floor of the office in a wedge of afternoon sunlight and looked through 50 years of a family together. Rebecca and Sarah as small girls in matching Easter dresses, their mother in a beehive, their father in his high school baseball uniform, their grandmother on the porch of a farmhouse in western Kentucky. They laughed once at a picture of Sarah in an unfortunate perm from the year of her senior prom. They cried, both of them, at a picture of Sarah holding Hannah as a newborn. They sat in silence for a long time. Daniel walked her to her car. "She would have wanted us to figure this out," he said. "I know," Rebecca said. "I know she would." She got in her car and she drove away, and Daniel stood in the parking lot until her taillights turned the corner. The following Sunday, Daniel and Rebecca drove together to the cemetery on Cave Hill Road, where Sarah was buried. It was the first time Rebecca had been able to bring herself to visit the grave. She had not attended the funeral. She had been in the middle of her custody appeal in another state, and her lawyer had told her, wrongly as it turned out, that appearing at the funeral would hurt her case. She had grieved alone in a rented apartment in Phoenix, with the phone off, for 4 days. They walked together across the grass. It was a bright day, warm for early May, and the trees were the color of new leaves. Daniel led her to a small granite marker set flat into the ground under an oak tree. It read, "Sarah Holloway Foster, beloved mother," and the dates. Rebecca stood over it for a long time without speaking. Then she knelt down and put both palms flat on the stone, and she closed her eyes, and her lips moved. Daniel stood a few steps back and did not intrude. When she stood up, her face was wet, but she was smiling. It was a small, tired, real smile. "She said she forgave me," Rebecca said, "in there. I don't know if it counts, but she said it." "It counts," said Daniel. They drove home in silence. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who had, for the first time in a long time, done a hard thing together and come out on the other side of it still standing. June came, then July, then, in the second week of August, exactly 6 months and 2 days after the night at Carousel 4, a letter arrived at the courthouse from Dr. Reyes and Hannah's guardian ad litem. Both of them recommended that the court authorize supervised visits between Hannah Foster and Rebecca Holloway. Daniel Foster filed a supporting motion. The judge, the same one who had accepted the plea, took 9 days to consider it. Then he signed the order. Rebecca met her niece for the first time in 7 months at a small park on the east side of Louisville, a park with a duck pond and a wooden play structure, and on the day they met, a great many people pretending very hard not to be watching them. Michael was one of them. He was off duty. He sat on a bench 30 yards away with Bear at his feet and a paper cup of coffee going cold in his hand. Hannah walked into the park holding her father's hand. She was wearing pink sneakers and a t-shirt with a cartoon dinosaur on it. Her hair had grown long enough to be pulled back into a small ponytail. She was carrying, of course, Officer Fluffy. Rebecca was sitting on a bench near the play structure. She stood up when they came into view. Her hands were clasped in front of her. She was not moving. Daniel bent down and said something to Hannah. Hannah looked up at Rebecca. She looked for a very long time. Michael watched her face and saw her thinking, saw her working through it, the way a small child works through the largest questions of her small life, with her whole body, her whole face, her whole self. Then Hannah let go of her father's hand. She walked Slowly at first, then faster, and Rebecca knelt down on the grass and opened her arms, and Hannah ran the last 5 yards and threw her small body into her aunt's, and Rebecca gathered her up and buried her face in the top of the little girl's head, and they stayed like that on the grass for what Michael would later swear was 10 minutes, but was probably more like 2. He looked down at Bear. The dog was watching, ears forward, tail slowly wagging. "You did that," Michael said. Bear thumped his tail on the concrete. The ceremony was held on the 4th of September in the small, non-denominational chapel at Louisville International Airport at the far end of the sea concourse. The chapel was not much, a beige carpeted room with a plain wooden cross on one wall, 12 chairs, a small pulpit, but it was where the airport chaplain suggested, and the Fosters agreed, and the airport administrator had cleared it for the small private event. It was a Wednesday morning. 12 people came: Michael and his wife Linda, Sergeant Ramirez and his wife, Detective Whitworth, the airport administrator and his assistant, the chaplain, Daniel Foster in his navy suit, Hannah Foster in a small navy dress that matched her father's suit, her hair in 2 braids, Officer Fluffy, tucked under one arm, Rebecca Holloway in a green cardigan, standing beside them, holding Hannah's other hand. Michael brought Bear. Bear wore his working harness, freshly cleaned, and a small blue collar with the department patch stitched on the side. The airport administrator said a few words. He talked about service. He talked about how, on the night in question, an officer and his dog had saved the life of a child. He talked about the Bronze Star, which was not a formal military decoration, but a recognition instituted by the Louisville Metro Police Department for outstanding acts of service by K-9 partners. He said that in the department's 27-year history of awarding it, this was only the 9th time. He asked Hannah to come forward. Hannah walked up in her small dress. Rebecca stayed at the back of the room. Daniel came forward with his daughter and knelt beside Bear, holding out the small bronze medallion on its blue ribbon so Hannah could see it. Hannah looked at the medallion. She looked at Bear. She reached out with one small hand and very carefully hooked the ribbon over the metal ring on Bear's harness where the administrator had pointed. It hung there, gleaming. "There," Hannah said. She patted Bear's shoulder. "Good doggy." Bear turned his head and licked her cheek once, softly. Hannah leaned against him. She wrapped both arms around his neck. She buried her face in his fur. She stayed there. Nobody in the small chapel moved. The chaplain, who was ready with a closing prayer, closed his book and let her stay. She held on for what Michael would later remember as the longest and quietest minute of his life. At the back of the room, Rebecca Holloway pressed her hand to her mouth and cried without a sound. Michael watched from where he stood near the door, and he thought about the night in the terminal, about the moment Bear had planted his paws and would not move, about the smell of warm milk and old fear rising up out of a bag no bigger than a laundry hamper. He thought about a woman in a sun hat, walking a rehearsed walk toward departures. He thought about a small hand pointing down a concourse. He thought about a dog whose training had told him only that a scent from a year ago had come back into his life, and about a dog whose heart, if such a word could apply to dogs, and Michael was more and more convinced it could, had told him that the small living thing inside that bag was worth waiting for, was worth standing over, was worth every hour of a long, cold night in a hospital hallway. Some smells, he thought, the heart recognizes long before the nose ever does. He walked out of the chapel a few minutes later. Bear walked beside him. He looked down the long tiled corridor of the sea concourse and past it to where, in another wing of another terminal, the great tired belt of Carousel 4 was making its slow, patient circle. It was empty of alarm now. It was full only of ordinary luggage and ordinary weary travelers reaching for it, and the ordinary hum of a world that had gone on as worlds do, whether or not the people in it knew what had almost happened there on a February night at 3 in the morning. He stopped for a moment beside the carousel. Bear stopped with him. The dog was calm now, ears easy, tail loose. He glanced up at Michael as if to say, "All right, partner, we're done here." Michael put his hand on the top of Bear's head and held it there and thought about how, in every life worth living, there are one or two nights that split the world in two, the night before and the night after, and how those nights, for most people, are private, are silent, are known only to the people who lived them. This one had been Hannah's and Daniel's and Rebecca's, and, in his quiet dog's way, it had been Bear's. Michael was only glad to have been there. He thought about Sarah Holloway Foster, whom he had never met. He hoped, wherever a person goes when someone else pushes them down a flight of stairs at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday, that she had seen her daughter today, standing tall in her navy dress with her arms around a police dog's neck, safe, whole, loved, 3 generations of Holloway women, somehow still holding hands across the space that death opens. He hoped Sarah knew that her last message to her sister had been heard, in the end, and answered. He hoped she was at peace. He whistled softly to Bear. "Come on, partner," he said. "Let's go home." They walked out of the airport together into the bright September sun, an old man in a blue uniform and an old dog with a new medal on his chest, and behind them, in the small chapel at the end of the C concourse, a little girl finally let go of a dog's neck and turned back toward her father, who was waiting, and her aunt, who was waiting, and the long and imperfect and beautiful business of being a family who had almost lost everything and had not. If Hannah's story stayed with you tonight, take a moment to leave a comment below about the part that touched you most. Tap the like button so more people can find their way to stories like this one, and subscribe to the channel so the next story we tell finds its way straight to you.